Good evening and welcome to the community room here at the Needham Free Public Library. Tonight we are pleased to have the last of our Elephant Fall Author Series. Dr. Benjamin Caplan is a distinguished figure in clinical cannabis medical care. He's the co-founder and chief medical officer of the CED Clinic, the CED Foundation, and EO Care, Inc. Dr. Caplan is at the forefront of delivering exceptional patient care and spearheading the development of cutting-edge cannabis education platforms. His CED clinic has treated over 18,000 patients and supervised the guidance and data collection over 300,000 others. He has also authored articles in such esteemed publications as the New England Journal of Medicine. His book, which is available for sale tonight, the Doctor-Approved Cannabis Handbook, serves as a definitive guide to effective cannabis therapies and renders complex information accessible to the audience. And tonight he is being interviewed by Matt Robinson, host of the Writer's Block on the Needham channel, and also the author of Lions, Tigers, and Bulldogs, an unofficial guide to the legends and lore of the Ivy League. So without further ado, Dr. Caplan and Matt Robinson.
Thank you, Gayon. Thank you, everyone, for coming on the last event for the season. So we'll the question that I first had when we got introduced is, how did you become the champion of this cause? How did you get from general medicine into this very specialized study?
Thanks for being here. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks to everybody who's here and for the people watching at home. I'm a regular family doctor. There's nothing special about me in terms of my training. I had no training when it came to cannabis. In medical school, they teach cannabis like cocaine or heroin is a stepping stone to other things, which turns out is not true at all. They don't teach that all of us have, when we're born, an endocannabinoid system. This is a system which happens to touch the plant, but it actually touches things that we make in our bodies anyway, whether or not you consume the plant. So I knew nothing about this. I did actually practice family medicine not far from where we are here at the Needham Library, at the Bethersville Deaconess Medical Center. And I do this crazy thing in clinic, which is I actually listen to people. When I'm with patients, I want to learn who they are and what they're interested in and what's helped them so far. It's a strange thing that doctors used to do before we just had to write check marks and kick people out. But one of the things I kept hearing from my patients was that cannabis was helping them and they didn't need my medicines. And of course, I became quickly the ignorant one in the room, not knowing as much as my patients did. So I did what I was taught to do. I opened books, I dug online, and I found that there's a lot of literature about cannabis. And some of it we've all heard, all that it makes people dumb or that it makes people lazy. But that's actually balanced with information which is the opposite, saying that actually people can become more focused with cannabis, that they can feel more relaxed, they can sleep better, they can heal in ways I didn't understand. And really nobody does understand now. So anyway, for me it was a pot of gold. I sort of discovered this hidden treasure that doctors weren't really paying attention to. And I thought, hey, I can carve a niche for myself. So for me it was both inspiring from a clinical perspective to learn, but also from a business perspective, I can establish myself and maybe survive in ways that doctors don't so much these days.
Was it difficult, or is it difficult dealing with your colleagues? Like, did you, when you started telling people about your plans to leave your office and your practice at BI, was there a scandal? I mean, what was the general reaction?
There were definitely a few interventions stations. Mostly in my family, people were like, what are you going to do? You're selling out. This is not what an upstanding physician would do. These are all crackheads who use cannabis, and you want to associate with these people? And of course, it was crazy. I mean, I knew from the people I'd seen in my clinic that these are regular people enjoying themselves. There's nothing wrong with them. And you know, growing up, I of course saw the hoodies I saw the kids in school that were misbehaving and consuming cannabis in ways that weren't useful. But now as a grown-up, I saw people who were using it fruitfully, in healthy ways, in ways that were better than the medicines I was able to prescribe. So yeah, colleagues have, it's an interesting story because over time, of course, cannabis is now about to be legalized, or at least descheduled federally. And I'm getting lots of calls from my old colleagues saying, wait a minute, like, what can we get in here? Like, it seems like there's a lot of money here. Today, the cannabis industry is a $30 billion industry. That's the entire cosmetics and self-care industry already. So there's a lot of money here, and I think clinicians who feel left out of the big bucks that doctors were promised when we were all kind of growing up are interested in making more money and certainly helping people too.
And helping people too.
If you can do both. No, I mean, these are hard times. Right now, Mass General is, there are 300 primary care doctors that are unionizing because they're burning out. They can't accept new patients. The entire Mass General Hospital can't accept new patients because they don't have physicians to carry them. This is scary times in a first world country.
What were some of the most prevalent misconceptions that people raised to you?
There's still misconceptions. I think as time goes on, people are mostly clueless about cannabis. People think that it's all about being high, and I would say 60–70% of the patients I see don't ever want to be high. It's just not interesting to them. So that cannabis is all about THC, making people high, is certainly a big misconception. That it's appropriate for everybody. A lot of people think this is just for kids, or it's just for people who don't have their life together, or can't do better. Those of us that go to pharmacies, it seems like an upstanding situation, and then you look at dispensaries and you think, oh, that's just a bunch of weirdos with earrings and nose piercings, and it's not for me. But of course, it's completely ridiculous. And actually, people who go to the dispensary often tell the same story, which is, oh my God, there are people like me. These are not weirdos. It's just regular people trying to get relief. So I think that the cannabis industry is just for oddballs. That's another common misconception. But there are so many. Honestly, almost anything people talk about with cannabis, when you hear people talking, is just hearsay and often misconstrued reality.
One of the things I was surprised to learn in the book is, going back to your point about the economics and the business of it, is that like the whole reefer madness movement wasn't so much because of the actual effects of the product, but about the people who were involved in the politics. In fact, someone pretty famous in the political and journalism industry, William Randolph Hearst, was apparently at the forefront of pushing people away from cannabis and other hemp products.
Yeah. Just a month or two ago, we started hearing these Nixon tapes that were publicized because of a FOIA lawsuits, and we heard Nixon, as he's publicly saying cannabis is bad and this should be evil and we should jail people for cannabis, was privately on these tapes saying that was perfectly innocent, that nobody was really hurt by it. It was sort of a non-thing. So certainly it's been a political football for ages. Not everybody knows the story that you tell about William Randolph Hearst that I mentioned in the book. But this was a media mogul of the 30s. And he owned the biggest newspaper in the area, I think it was here in the Northeast. He also owned the oak trees that the paper was made from. But an invention rolled around in, I think, 1933 called the decorticator, which looks like one of those old rusty lawnmowers that spins and chops up grass, but it could chop up hemp and make paper faster than his oak trees. So it's pretty stiff competition for the foundation of his business. So he has a convenient little meeting with the politicians of the time. Harry Anslinger was the Federal Bureau of Narcotics chief at the time. And he said, let's make this go away. I stand to gain a lot. The news I put out is important. And of course, Anslinger at the time was a devout Catholic and saw drugs as an evil thing religiously. So they had a nice match and created what we ended up having as the Marijuana Tax Act of, I think, 1937. And since then, the AMA, which the American Medical Association, which had embraced cannabis for years, took it out of the pharmacopoeia. and doctors stopped learning about it. And the culture, of course, kept using cannabis, but it became part of the underground. But before the 1920s, cannabis was used probably as the most popular, most prevalent medicine on earth. Tincture of cannabis has been prescribed for, thousands of years. It's really just the last 100 years that we've been under this bubble of misinformation and misunderstanding, which was shocking to me. I had no idea, and nobody's teaching this. It's left out of the history books. But here I am learning from my patients.
One of the things when I've told people about your book that I got so much out of is they say, well, there's no research. What is this all based on? Why is that such a big misconception? It was happening everywhere else in the world, even when it wasn't popular or popularized here. How do people say that there's no research and evidence when we know that it goes back in ancient cultures?
Right. No, I think partly because we've grown up snotty. I think as modern cultures has aged, we have randomized controlled trials now, and we have meta-analyses now, better and better sort of testing tools and statistical analyses. And we forget that observation is the core of science, and that learning what is working for people, observational science is still science. It's not as high quality material, but if we look on PubMed, which is sort of the international repository of medical studies, you'll see 10 times as many studies about cannabis and the components of cannabis as the common cold or Lyme disease or cancer. There's a massive archive, massive repository of literature that nobody's reading. It's crazy, right? Like I'm just a kid from Massachusetts. All of a sudden, I'm unleashing this literature that really nobody's reading, and it gets me into these very fancy magazines and writing a book. It's strange that we've lost touch with this culture. It's all there for everybody to learn.
Well, to go back to your earlier point, do you see that now that it's a big business, there'll be more interest, or are you hoping, or are you finding colleagues who actually see it as a new way to treat and support their patients?
Yeah, it's an interesting puzzle, because as amazing as I'm hopefully making it out to seem, the limitations for the businesses and industry to get involved, including the medical industry, are steep because of the regulatory structure. And it's just, again, built on misinformation. We know about the two major components of cannabis these days, CBD and THC. THC, the one that makes people high, CBD doesn't have euphoric effects the same way. CBD is fully legal. The 2018 Farm Bill made CBD completely legal. They can mail it, they can ship it, you can sell it, you can bring it on an airplane. THC, on the other hand, completely illegal. You have to have a state license, you have to have a whole regulatory structure around it to be able to consume it and buy it. And the difference between these molecules, they're actually almost interchangeable chemically. There's one molecule that's different. And it just speaks the crazy lack of understanding that our culture has about this plant. And these two molecules, by the way, CBD and THC, are 2 of 1,000 that this plant naturally produces. Calling it a cannabis medicine is fine, but it's more like a cannabis buffet or a cannabis pharmacy. And one of the things that I've discovered in this pool of literature is that each of these 1,000 components has a place in medicine. We call them terpenes if people are interested. But if you look under a microscope, you look at cannabis, you'll see one of those molecules called alpha-pinene. And people go and squeeze it out of the cannabis plant or pine needles in the forest. And this is actually very popular these days. Around Christmas, you smell pine, for Christmas time. But that, when you inhale it in tiny amounts, actually helps you breathe a little bit more comfortably. Sort of like if you go into the forest, you have forest bathing is what the Japanese call, but you can breathe more fully. And we know from medicine that it's called a bronchodilator. It dilates your breathing tubes, your lungs, basically the same way that asthma medicines do. And that's just one of these 1,000 components. There's another one you probably know of from the smell of geraniums or roses called geraniol. And that's another one companies can squeeze out of the cannabis plant or from natural sources elsewhere. And geraniol has medicinal components too. So imagine this plant became illegal, and it's really the only natural pharmacy on earth. And of course, conspiracy theories can pop up because of that. Well, what about pharmaceutical industry? Did they help kind of mum this? Or, the paper industry and Hearst, did he mum this? There's sort of a lot of people that stand to gain a lot if cannabis is out of the picture. But it's sad.
Well, it sounds like the tide is turning there. There might be more to benefit from getting on board finally.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, part of this journey for me was facing the reality that the institutions I've come to trust and really look up to were not as solid and trustworthy necessarily as what I'd thought. The FDA, for example, is a very important body, and it's in the news, especially these days with the new administration and what might happen to the FDA. But the FDA is populated with an old school of thinking, and as if pharmaceutical medicine is the only medicine. And that was I think, institutionalized. I mean, depending on which conspiracy theory you believe. Everybody from William Randolph Hearst to DuPont. I've heard tons of these conspiracy theories, but basically creating a pathway for pharma to exist and dominate. And we've missed out on natural sources of relief, which oftentimes, if you talk to your neighbors, are better. People say that they're getting off of their medicines because of cannabis. Your body needs, I think, natural components that are not just sniper rifles for particular pathways or particular receptors. And that sniper rifle action is how pharmaceutical medicines are approved. We have to see exactly how they work, and we have to make sure that they're 100% safe in 10,000 people. So we end up with an industry that's dominated by pharma instead of nature.
What was happening in the rest of the world while our government and prominent people were pushing us away? It seems like the help and healing were still going on elsewhere. How did that not, or is that what's getting back to us now?
No, I think cannabis has always been the human plant. I think we talk about bamboo being the panda plant. You never see them apart. Or milkweed is the plant for the monarch butterfly. If you crush a cannabis seed, you'll see almost 100% match for what the human body requires. Protein, carbohydrates, fats, omega-3s, omega-6s, literally. All the minerals too. This plant absorbs in a ratio that's coincidentally, maybe it's just a pure coincidence, but it's pretty odd. But I would argue this is the human plant. And no matter what the industry and whatever government is doing, people know that it works. And that's why I think this has survived. I mean, against all odds, like literally illegal on all fronts. You couldn't find it, you can't buy it, you can't consume it in public. And yet here we are with a whole industry that's come against all of those odds to legalize it again. It's really incredible. And for us to be alive during this process is really remarkable. I mean, it doesn't seem like so special, but it's really amazing that this plant, which has been subjugated and put to the side for so many years, is now coming front and center for all of us to be able to have, or at least pass on to our kids, is really remarkable.
What were some of the ailments that were there any that you were surprised to find out that it has an application for?
This is another one of those misconceptions. There's so many ailments that cannabis helps because it helps sort of fundamentally differently than what we're used to in pharmaceuticals. Like, if your nose is clogged, you sort of look for something that's going to open up those airways, and you have medicine that goes up your nose for that area. And it's very sniper rifle-esque. But cannabis, at its best, is working systemically. People call it a sort of an equalizer. And for most people, cannabis will help them sleep. So if it did nothing else but help people sleep, your body's immune system gets stronger when you're sleeping. You can fight illness when you're sleeping. If you're sleeping better, you're going to get better. That's not disease specific. And yet, there are people out there who don't have trouble sleeping. Maybe it's anxiety or depression, and they can't get out of their own head, or they're perennially depressed. Cannabis can help lift them out of that. And that's actually an interesting point to highlight. Most of us here know about someone who's happy-go-lucky. No matter what happens, no matter how rainy it is or cold, they're seeing the silver lining in things. Why is that? Is it because they were raised right? Is it because their clothing is comfortable? Is it because we don't know, actually. But I would argue it's because they have a rich endocannabinoid system, the system we were talking about before, that they're born feeling a little bit more rosy. And there's a woman, it's probably too esoteric for people to remember, but Jo Cameron was a woman in Ireland, maybe it was Scotland, but she never felt a day of pain in her life. She was discovered because she didn't need Novocaine for dental procedures. And she's never had a day of depression in her life. And her issue in her body is she has a breakdown, she has a malfunction in the part of her body which breaks down natural endocannabinoids. So she walks around happy-go-lucky. And the other side of the coin are the people who are curmudgeon-y, just grumps. All those Scrooges out there who are in pain all the time. They can't have a happy day. They're depressed all the time. They just find the worst in everything. I'd argue they have an endocannabinoid deficiency. And those are the people, remarkably, who get better when they're consuming cannabis. They're supplementing this lack in their bodies with an external source. And as time has gone on, we've discovered that, oh, wait a minute, all of the children who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder tend to have endocannabinoid deficiencies. And we look at people who have pain syndromes, fibromyalgia, or CRPS, it's a horrible pain syndrome, tend to have endocannabinoid deficiencies. So there's a whole field of science here that really is poorly understood. We don't even have tools yet to measure this endocannabinoid system. We know it's made up of certain receptors and certain things that bind those receptors, but we don't know what normal is. We don't know how to judge different people. I mean, this is like the beginning of this science. And yet it's part of all of our bodies. It's so foundational. It's really an astounding kind of reality that I found myself in the middle of.
How have you been able to bridge people from the traditional pharmaceuticals that they're used to and maybe have been on for years, if not, generations? I mean, I'd be interested in a side note to find out, do people who have ties to the medical industry, is it harder to bridge them out? And, obviously there's no one answer for everyone, but is there a strategy that you've developed in order to first get people comfortable with the idea and then actually taper them off what they're used to and bring them to this new modality?
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things about this work clinically is that the product speaks for itself. That when people start taking cannabis, as long as they're not overwhelmed, they're not taking products which are just not meant for them, almost everybody does really well. In my clinic, 83% of people who start on medicines get off of at least one in the first year. I mean, that 83% is incredible. I don't know any other thing like that. So I think the product sort of speaks for itself, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a home run for everybody the first go. And one of the things that I coach people with is, you can't learn all of this stuff in one sitting. It's a lot, even just hearing this lecture, I'm sure, so far. But I think people can handle small decisions. And there are 4 real choices in cannabis with the industry we have today that people can wrap their minds around. The first decision is about timing. Some people want results instantly. You can have a product that's cannabis-based that works instantly. Or you can have a product that's going to last a long time. Some people have anxiety for a whole day, or they want to sleep for a whole night, or they have pain all day long. They want something that's going to last longer. That's one decision people can have and choose products accordingly. What's the timing I want for this medicine? Decision number 2 is about alteration. I don't like calling it high because that's stigmatized now and we judge people for feeling high. Although I would really call that joy, and I don't know how we would judge people for that, but that's the puritanical culture we have. So feeling altered, some people, again, I mentioned, don't want to feel that at all. And some people like a little levity. They want to change the channel on Modern Life for a couple hours, which I think we're entitled to. I don't discourage at all for patients that are interested, but for some people it's just not comfortable. So you can turn that on or off. So timing, alteration, energy is something cannabis can do also. Many people use it for sleep, and obviously for sleep it's helping you relax and calm down and feel sleepy. But there are plenty of people out there, including students, who use cannabis to focus and to feel more alert the way we use coffee. And cannabis can do that. So you can see within these three choices, you really have drastic differences for this medicine in a way that's personal. The fourth decision is really a fake decision. It's more like the amplitude of any of these others. You can crank up something that works right away. You can have something that's lasting a really long time. You can have something that's going to just conk you out for the night, sort of increasing the strength of any of these other three decisions. And that's more or less how I structured the guidance in the book, was within these kind of core choices, how do you understand the market? How do you make it personal to you so that you're getting what you want out of it? I wanted to write a book that was not just teaching people esoteric things, but practical insights for how to make this a part of their lives for the better.
All right, my copy is completely dog-eared left and right, so it's it was a real revelation. But obviously you'd like to at least have a manageable amount of clients that you're kind of hand-holding, and especially if they're more reticent to switch over. For people who don't have direct access, the market is exploding, and CBD is being slapped on and put into, it's almost like gluten-free. It's like I see the label on so many products. How can people know that they're choosing something of quality that's safe, and instead of just throwing a cocktail together for themselves that might not give them positive results?
Right. No, I've seen CBD now in toothpaste and mouthwash, and God, it's everywhere. It's very strange. I mean, I guess it makes sense. If you're a company trying to sell something, you want to get the latest, hottest thing. There have been formal medical studies looking at what people are selling out there, and they show that about 84% of the time, what you see on the shelf is really there, is really what they advertise is really in the product. These studies have shown there is no real toxicity. These companies are not putting weird stuff or toxic stuff in the CBD. So most overall products are fine. Some of the products will shortchange you. I mean, this is not really news. Vitamin companies have been doing this for years. They say they put one thing and they put less. But the good thing is there's not toxicity. They're not playing with people's lives. If you want to be extra certain, a certificate of analysis is a lab testing that can be done for any product. The local dispensaries inside states mandate that companies that are producing cannabis products do this. They have to do basic testing with a third-party lab. So it's not their own lab, it's somewhere else, and they put it into their machines and figure out what's safe, what's it got or not. These third-party labs are accessible to everybody. And companies that are selling CBD, remember this is the one that's online and free, not free, available, legal. Those companies can find certificates of analysis too. They can pay a lab to test their products. And these days, almost all of the reputable labs do this as a part of their business. So if you go to a website, whatever CBD product website you find, you can look for a certificate of analysis. And it's a lab test, so it's going to be confusing for most people, but you can pretty much clearly see that there's nothing toxic, that they're clean products, that they're selling, and there's no contaminants. So to that degree, it's a little bit of science for most people, but also that's part of my job. And what I do with my patients is guide them with where to buy products, how to understand this crazy market.
What about, are there any general guidelines about the various delivery systems, like the patches and the rubs versus the drinks and the gummies and the edibles, and how does that all break out?
Yeah, that's one of the things that's overwhelming for people, because you walk into a dispensary, you go into these websites, and it's just a million things, and what is that? I don't know what to pick, because I have whatever, arm pain, or whatever, insomnia. Formulations are part of that decision tree that I mentioned. So I've sort of taken that into account. Some products are digested very quickly. Some products take a long time to digest but last a long time because of the formulation. Things we inhale work very quickly. Our lungs, if you laid out the wiring inside your lungs, is almost a full tennis court. It's massive. And if you're inhaling something, all of those blood vessels see cannabis products and they're distributed in your body very quickly, so you feel something rapidly. That's why people like smoking, is that it works instantly. You get that instant gratification. So what I sort of proposed as choices before, if you know I want something that works quickly, you'd find out that the things which work quickly relate to the method of consumption. So I think it's probably too much for people to be able to process all of the different formulations, but I think people can handle simple decisions that have to do with them.
Are there some that are generally better for certain populations than others in terms of delivery, to bridge into this world? Is there something that's kind of slow acting so you can kind of get a better feel for it and be more predictable? Because I mean, like something like smoking, it's hard to control how much of what you're getting in your body at once. So,
right? Yeah. No, it's tempting for us to try to squeeze complicated people into very simple choices. And I wish I could give a sort of simple answer to everybody, but there are just so many different kinds of people, and I think medicine, the field of medicine, has started to realize that we can't put everybody into a single box, that we have to have personalized medicine to some degree. I think if all things being equal, gun to the head, I'd say tincture is a way that people can manage to find their dose really easily. And it stinks, actually. It's like oily, and you have to open your mouth and look in a mirror, and it's just terribly awkward. But if 3 drops doesn't work for you today, you could try 4 tomorrow, and maybe 6 the next day. And you can find your sweet spot really easily. It's hard to do that with edibles. It's hard to do that with things you're smoking or inhaling. But you have a little bit more control with tinctures. And actually, these days, there are tinctures which you can put into whatever else you're drinking, like your coffee or your water. And you can dissolve certain cannabis products in that and have a drink. And that's also something you could taper or adjust very easily.
So it seems that you've become quite the pioneer in this field. In fact, I understand you've been called to speak to Congress?
Yeah. No, it's more, I think, an expression of the paucity in the field than anything special about me. I'm an academic. I treat people well. I have a clean record. But other than that, I'm just a curious mind. But I happen to start a lot of companies because I see the need. And one of the companies that I co-founded and I'm chief medical officer for is called the Commonwealth Project, which is based here in Massachusetts, but it's a national aim to help seniors get access to cannabis nationally. And we're trying to put together product producers, cannabis product producers, with insurance companies, including Medicare, Medicaid, but private insurance companies too. Everybody stands to gain. The insurance companies want to save money. People want to get off of their medicines and be healthy. The government in particular is an insurance agent. Once people hit 65, the government's in charge, and they have a lot to gain by lowering their costs. So if people are getting better, they're happier, they're sleeping better, they're in less pain, and they're costing the government less money, we've discovered that can save the government upwards of $60 billion a year. It's not small potatoes. This incoming administration, whatever people have to say about it or feel about it, one of the mandates we're hearing about so far is to drop prices for the government. That they have a goal, I think Musk and whatever his name is, Ramaswamy, whatever, they have a goal to drop prices. And if they can understand that cannabis might be saving the government $60+ billion a year, that's a huge amount that they stand to gain. So there's opportunity out here. So I got into that, and that's the company that was invited to testify for Congress this year, one of 25.
What are your other main ventures, and how did you decide, that they had to be distinct entities?
So it's not some master plan, actually. I sort of look for what I think is right. Clinic, of course, was basic because I want to meet people and understand what people need and have my kind of thumb on the pulse. But I saw that people need guidance. That I can only see the people I see in clinic, and what about the rest of the world? So I created a company that digitizes care. It occurred to me, when we go to CVS or Rite Aid or Walgreens, you pick up medicines, the doctor doesn't know if you picked up those medicines. They don't know if you're taking them. They don't know if they work. Sort of an important piece of the puzzle. So I helped to create a company that basically puts the whole picture together. We follow people at home on an app, and we know what people are looking for because they profile ahead of time. The app is called EO, the company's called EO. But it follows them home and guides them. You get a notification, this is what you should be taking today. Did you take it? Yes. Did it work? No? Okay, we'll make an adjustment. And we can be with people at home and help them tune their own medicine. It's not so crazy, right? It's like a simple idea, but it just hadn't been done. And then separately, we were talking about the literature that people aren't reading. So I started hoarding all the literature. And I would download what articles I could. I would buy articles that I couldn't download. And I created what was very quickly the world's largest archive of cannabis literature. And I put it on a Google Drive and I shared it with the world. We don't need to charge people for scientific literature. So with that repository, that library, I've created web-based tools where people can learn via chatbot, sort of a chatbot librarian. And people aren't going to read and understand most of the literature, but they can operate and talk to an AI chatbot, which will translate the literature to their language or simplify it for them to understand. So there's a basic translator. So that became another company. I just keep going, whatever the needs are, as long as I have time in the day. This feels like my hood now.
Well, we're honored you could join us. Take some time for us, which is terrific. But if you had a hope, not that I don't see you stopping anytime soon. I hope that you don't. But if what do you want? Is it more important to change the way people think about this, or to educate, or to just get the products out there? What is the big G goal?
That's a great question. I think stigma is such a fierce enemy. I mean, we were all brought up to believe these twisted things about natural medicine, about people who weren't wearing a white coat, these off the beat path providers, and certainly cannabis itself. And I think people unfortunately learn the hard way that the system is broken, that their doctor isn't listening to them, that they're not feeling better. And we all kind of wander in our own silos thinking frustrated thoughts that we're not getting better, that the provider isn't listening to us, or that we don't know where to go. Like menopause, for example, this affects 1 billion people today. And there's very little known about what to do with it. And very few providers who are knowledgeable about it. In medical school, you maybe get a month. And that's a catastrophe. It's just a crazy reality. But menopause is shunned, is put to the side because of stigma. Because women had been sort of put on a pedestal as being machines of fertility and not humans, not beings that have more value than their fertility. So stigma is really powerful, and for cannabis, I think it's caused a lot of suffering unnecessarily. So if I can help people realize that this is not the evil that we were taught it to be, that's enough. And that's a big job. I mean, I think for different people, for the geeks, that's a different job than people who know nothing about academics, and people who are in pain, they're not interested in learning, they want relief. There's a lot of different faces to that job. But I think stigma covers the most evil.
Well, thank you for helping to clarify for us. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand. I'll bring out the mic.
You want mine or yours?
You're the guest. All
right.
When you start, someone who comes to you with a complaint that you think that cannabis may fit, where do you start? Do you prescribe it a tincture by drops, by age, by weight, by gender? Where do you start?
I start by getting off of my horse and being equal with patients. Because I think the medical model that we have now assumes that doctors know everything, patients know nothing about their own lives, which is just weird. So I start by getting to know someone, what their interests are. I sort of fish for their place on these decisions I was mentioning before, but I get to understand what their real needs are. And I can translate that to specific products pretty easily, but some people want to learn more. Some people don't want to learn more. Like, that's a very big difference. Usually older generations want the doctor to be paternalistic and tell them what to do because they don't want to think about it anymore. They just want relief. Younger people tend to want to look up everything. And so I might give one patient resources to learn more. I might give another patient just a shopping list and specific instructions. So it's very different person to person. But I think one of the other things on the list of things I would hope to change, medicine has taken away a lot of agency. You know, we want control over our own lives, especially when it comes to illness. We feel so disempowered by our illness. Like, all of a sudden, you know, whatever job or fancy person we might be, we're knocked on our bums because of a cold or because of pain or whatever. That loss of agency comes back with cannabis medicine in a way that's very different than what we're used to. I mean, in cannabis, you can essentially hop the pharmacy counter and pick whatever pills you want. You have the power to do that. That's how the system is set up now. And of course, that's crazy, because the people at the dispensaries don't know what they're serving up, let alone people shopping there. But that empowerment is special and really important. So what I try to do is help my patients be the masters of their own fate. You know, I don't want to be needed. I don't want to be responsible for everybody all the time. I would rather they know themselves best. They can pick the products that suit their changing needs better than I ever could. So my job is just to teach, which makes it easier for me. I love it. I love teaching. I don't want to be responsible. I want to be a teacher.
Is there a way to, as part of the licensure needed to open a dispensary, to make an education program so that people can go in and think that and know that the staff has their best interest at heart and isn't just throwing their personal favorite products at them? Or
I wish. The sad reality is those kinds of aspirational goals of the medical cannabis industry actually being medical fly in the face of regulatory hurdles. And how do you judge that? Whose education is right or not right? How do you force people to learn? Do you test them? How do you know? There's a lot of hiccups there. And the reality is, you know, not a lot of people know, the industry is suffering terribly. I mean, you know, I mentioned the $30 billion number, but many dispensaries are failing. They're not meeting their goals. And most of them put in sometimes $16, $20 million to get open. And they're trying to make ends meet. So they are pushing out products that will sell and make them money more than what will help someone. So it's a broken system. I mean, you know, it's a hard thing to do. But my hope, I guess, you know, in part, the government taking the reins and having a little bit more control, is that maybe the system of government can do better than we've done state by state and, you know, society alone.
I guess to piggyback on everything you've been saying, do you, in an ideal world, see sort of what you would call traditional medical providers becoming more familiar with cannabis and them trying to recommend this more? Or do you see these kind of as two industries with a similar umbrella that will remain?
Yeah, it's a cutting question. It's a great question. I've watched the doctors around and medical providers that aren't doctors, but I've watched them evolve from don't do that, why would you do that, to if you're going to do it, okay, I don't want to hear about it. And that turned into, well, I don't know much, I can't recommend anything for you, which is sort of the dominant paradigm now. Their patients are coming telling them that it's working for them. They're happy with cannabis. And that puts doctors in a really weird position because they feel like they can't prescribe it, which is actually false. It's like another one of these layers of misinformation. Doctors' licenses, nurses' licenses are not threatened by engaging with cannabis. The local policies of hospitals might prevent them from prescribing it or having it on site. And that's a layer of confusion. If patients can't go to a hospital and have cannabis, then logically they shouldn't be able to have it in the outpatient world either. So doctors have sort of fallen on this really, lazy is too harsh. They don't have to get involved. They don't have to learn something new. And this is a huge piece of medicine. It's a lot to learn. So does that mean it will become its own specialty? Maybe. But I think it's so easy right now because it's so new and there's not much information out there. It's easy for doctors to start learning from their patients and not be so scared. I mean, one of the things about cannabis that is the foundation of it all is you can't hurt yourself. You might feel really uncomfortable for a little while, but that's the worst of it. There are people who die from consuming cannabis, which is not to say that there aren't deaths from cannabis. People consume cannabis in stupid ways, get behind the wheel and drive and kill people. There's a young woman in Massachusetts actually who had an allergy to cannabis, worked at a cannabis producing factory and died. It's tragic. But by and large, regular people aren't consuming cannabis and having ill effects. So it is safe, and safe enough for doctors to start learning with patients.
Is it more in medical school or nursing school training? Like, do you know, is there any sort of
It is
education?
not. No, I do know, and it's not. It takes medicine a long time to change and to grow, but the people who trained me, I've asked, and they're not interested in learning from me. So who else is teaching? Who else is learning? Like, I don't know. Yeah, it's really hard. It's a really interesting problem. That's going to be worse if the U.S. reschedules, because all of a sudden it's going to be prescriptive, and where are the doctors going to prescribe it? There aren't many.
It seems like it'll lag behind a little bit. Like this generation now that's sort of growing up with it being, to your point, the stigma's changing a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's hope in 50 years.
Yeah, no. I
Okay, sorry. I didn't get
we're
it.
good?
Yeah, we're good.
Make sure you wait for the mic to get
Okay,
to
sorry, but
Okay. No, it's fine.
repeat the question maybe.
So the question is sort of getting at, will this generation be better off than the next generation, or sort of where does the change happen? I think it's going to hit us by storm, and I think it's going to be a crazy storm for a while, and we're going to be better off because of it. It's never happened before that the people knew more than the professionals, and that the people were right. That's never happened before, and the impact that cannabis has on people is better, is more widespread, is more deep than antibiotics. Like, it's crazy how effective this is. We don't have anything that's like this. So it's going to be revolutionary for medicine. I mean, we have a medical industry that's completely overworked, burned out. It needs release of stress. It needs pressure release.
It needs cannabis.
It needs cannabis, for sure. No, seriously. But they don't know that.
Physician, heal thyself.
Yeah. That was actually Hippocrates, that said doctors are there just to entertain patients while they get better themselves. Those times they had cannabis.
Lessons from the ancients.
Are there medical conditions that would have ill effects with cannabis? Like, for instance, atrial fibrillation, you can't even drink coffee.
That's a great question. No, of course. And I'm standing on a rosy podium here, and we're focused more on positives, which is perhaps irresponsible, and I appreciate the question. So the question is about what does cannabis harm medically? And one of the actions of cannabis is to hit the heart muscle and activate it. And it actually happens in a way that's different than the systems we currently understand and treat and have medicines for. It's a completely different system, completely different set of actions. People who have heart issues where activating their heart might put them at risk would not respond well. Those people are generally well monitored in the current medical world. So the people where that would be a doomsday scenario are pretty rare, but they do happen. And if you look at the medical literature, you'll see scary stories of people suddenly dying after they consumed cannabis. And in those days, it was done deal. Okay, cannabis was involved, that was it. But I think if we had looked deeper, we would see things like they had naturally, some kind of heart defect. It wasn't the cannabis causing it, it was sort of cannabis unleashing that, unraveling that, discovering it. Other conditions, cannabis is drying. We all know cotton mouth and dry eyes from people get red bloodshot. For some people who have dental issues, drying mucosa will be bad for their dentistry. And you'll have downstream effects from just the drying. And same with dry eyes. So there are lots of ways cannabis can be a bad match for certain individuals, which is why I think the medical part of it, the leadership part of medical care won't ever be supplanted by people helping themselves. I don't think it'll be a sort of total DIY industry. But who's gonna do it? Like, there aren't providers out there who know enough about cannabis and can help people. It's a real problem. So I think there are people at risk of proceeding themselves without guidance. I think that's risky for some people. But I think it's also there's so much more benefit that even if there's a portion of people who suffer, from a public health perspective, the people that stand to gain and heal from cannabis is just overwhelming.
I guess I think speak for everyone when I say we're very grateful to have such a great guide living amongst us, and I thank you for the time to talk, and thank you all for coming, and thanks to the library and the LFN for putting on this series. And that's it. Good night, folks.
All right.